Hey, I'm Kevin Dierendorf. I run a blog called Mazer Patrol.
And I'm Alex Rushdie. I have a website called Control All Monsters, and I also work in video game development at 13am Games and love giant monsters.
So we did a panel over a year ago at G-Fest, along with Steve Pazenski and Jessica Tseang of the Kaiju Kingdom podcast. And funny thing is, when you get three people who all have their own shows up on stage, everyone kind of assumes that somebody else is recording, and turns out none of us were actually recording that. So we felt a little bit bad about that. Have been intending to do a summary because I think we did some good work for this panel, but the thing that kind of gave us a good kick in the pants to get this out is actually tomorrow, as of our recording, the fancy Blu-ray set for the entire Gamera franchise is going to be hitting from Arrow Video. So
Absolutely, the whole gigantic box set. The heavy. I understand. I don't have a copy yet. I understand it's got some heft to it.
it is a cinder block. You could bludgeon someone with that set. I wouldn't recommend that because you damage a very rare and, as I understand, sold out in many places sets. But it's quite the thing. I've heard some accounts of people that need both hands to pick it up. We're not going to
Cool.
talk about the whole Gamera franchise, but we did want to talk about the Heisei saga, because when we did our panel, it was the 20-year retrospective of the end of it, and as I don't think enough people necessarily recognize even today how fantastic those movies are. I think in the kaiju community, it's kind of taken for granted, but if you get the people that are maybe a little newer to the franchise, or to the genre in general, or maybe a little bit more casual, they might just think of, oh well, Gamera, he's the Mystery Science Theater character or whatever, and haven't really taken the plunge. I hope that everyone does, especially with this new box set coming out. But even once you've watched them, there's some maybe information that you might not be familiar with, and I think we'll be here to plug in some of those gaps.
Yeah, and highlight I think as well some of the ancillary media. I know a lot of it is actually included in the box set, but there's some other pieces of Heisei Gamera media that I think are pretty cool and worth searching out.
Oh, there's so much, and we're definitely not going to do this as try to replace anything that's in those box sets. You should check out the audio commentaries and the insane amount of supplementary materials. There's a documentary that's like 6 hours long on there. It's amazing.
I think it's gonna take like the rest of 2021 to finish watching everything that's in there.
That is reasonable, yes.
Awesome. So,
Uh,
I think when we started this, we did this at G Fest, and I mean, even though Gamera is very well known, I think since there has not been a new Gamera film in such a long time, there's actually a lot of new Godzilla fans that have been brought into this, the kaiju genre, thanks to 2014 and King of the Monsters and Shin Godzilla. But they have not watched Gamera, and they're like, why should we care about this giant flying turtle? That sounds kind of silly. But I think there's a lot that Godzilla, especially the newer Godzilla films, owe to Gamera. And chief among them is that the Gamera movies were so well regarded, and they made a good amount of money, and that led to Toho actually hiring the director Shusuke Kaniko to create his own Godzilla film. And this was that would have been almost a decade after he had kind of tried to petition Toho to let him direct. I believe it was Mothra versus Godzilla. Is that right, Kevin?
yeah.
Yeah, and they said no. So he worked on Gamera, and then Gamera was so good, they're like, okay, we'll let you direct your own movie. Shin Godzilla, which is co-directed by Shinji Gucci and Hideaki Anno, and Shinji Higuchi is the special effects mastermind behind the Gamera trilogy, and of course the most recent legendary 2014 Godzilla reboot. That it was a lot of narrative. I mean, a lot of people call that Godzilla Guardian of the Universe. It has a lot of a lot of similar threads, plot threads, similar decisions, and of course, King of the Monsters also has some allusions to other the Gamera trilogy in some of its plot points. I gotta open
They
this.
they they maintain that they had not seen the Gamera trilogy when making the legendary films, but I don't believe them.
Yeah, I like definitely someone on that team has watched those films. Someone in the writing room, someone had to have seen these movies, and I I I do also think that it wouldn't be surprising if if some of the chief creative people hadn't watched Gamera, but they came to a lot of the same creative decisions just because like they're telling this kind of blockbuster monster story. They're some of the best and most like correct decisions, like how they relate. Like the idea that King of the Monsters opens with Godzilla destroying San Francisco and how that leads to a character holding a grudge against him, like that makes sense. They may have taken it from Batman versus Superman, they may not have, but it was certainly done in Gamera because it makes a lot of sense as a monster story. And
Yeah,
so, yeah, go ahead.
it's I mean specifically it's a character holding a grudge against our heroic monster killing one of their family members that leads them to unleash a more dangerous monster that will oppose them later on in the movie. So
Yeah, yeah, and there's a lot like the military in King of the Monsters eventually deciding to side with Godzilla, the discovery of Atlantis at the bottom of the ocean, and a group of people worshiping Godzilla, shots of like I don't know military equipment showing bogies that end up being giant monsters. I don't know.
yeah,
A lot of it feels like when you watch Gamera, if you've watched Godzilla 2014 or King of the Monsters first, you'll be like, oh, that's probably where they got that from.
yeah, the graveyard, the
Mm.
uh, going to Indonesia to find the remains of a deceased kaiju as you're opening to your movie, things like that.
Kaiju falling out of the stratosphere and
Yeah,
into a city.
it's something that I would be very surprised if this was just pure coincidence.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
So these movies are fantastic. Again, would recommend anyone who has not seen them go just watch them and then maybe come back to our discussion here because we'll be. I think we've already gotten into spoilers, but
Yeah.
that's just kind of the way of things. But it's also important to recognize that they didn't necessarily happen in a vacuum. And one of the things that's the most amazing about the trilogy is Gamera movies were never very high quality before this, and they had really been at their nadir if you just look at the Gamera franchise sort of on its own. So basically, what had happened is the studio that was making Gamera, Daiei, they had gone bankrupt in 1971 when they were working on Gamera versus Ziegler. They were actually told that they would just have to keep working on it for no pay and promptly rioted. There was a lot of destruction of stuff at the studio and after the production as well. They had started working on another project and the elements that they had together, including from what I understand a suit, were all completely destroyed by rioting workers as they were frustrated about lost pay. And the Gamera writer who had done the screenplays for the 7 movies to date was actually in lieu of payment given the screen rights to the character. So 3 years later, Tokuma Shoten, the publisher, they bought the rights to Daiei as a studio, and they slowly over time built it back up. And they were, going through some little iterative processes here. A lot of imported movies, a lot of home video stuff that was sort of low budget helped them build up sort of to a good place. And after the successful relaunch of the Godzilla franchise in the 80s, they really wanted to go back to the well with Daimajin and Gamera. They did approach the original creators, Noriaki Yuasa, the director of 7 of the 8 original Gamera movies, and Nissan Takahashi, who wrote all of them. And they had this pitch for a movie, Gamera versus Garashar, which you can kind of see how that would have turned out in one of the extra features that's included on the Gamera, the first DVDs from Shout Factory, or is actually included on the new Blu-ray set from Arrow as well. But that wasn't what they actually wound up going with at the end of the day. I think we're probably better off for it. So it kind of was lame for the original creators to be cut out of the loop like that, but they did get some consolation prizes. So Takahashi, who technically had the rights to Gamera, he was told, well, that was basically an agreement that was made with a different studio because we are restructured now. We're not going to honor it. He sort of got shafted on that, but he was able to write his story as a novel, Gamera versus Phoenix. Meanwhile, Yuasa got to use the Gamera suit in a couple of movies in this Cosplay Warrior Cutie Night series that he made, which basically in those Gamera functions like a Pokemon that the main characters use, where they send out a capsule that has Gamera in it, and Gamera will show up and briefly help out the main characters, and it's a fun little cameo. So that brings us to the trilogy proper. At this point in the panel, we did our summaries of the 3 movies. I don't know. Do we want to try that again, or do we want to?
I don't know if it's super necessary. We can do little, maybe like quick, very 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 brief recaps.
Again, I implore you, if you're watching this and haven't watched the movies, do it. Just go watch them. They're so excellent. But if it's been a while, I guess Gamera Guardian of the Universe, is a movie in which giant birds show up. They are eating people. A atoll is found floating in the ocean. It winds up being this ancient enemy of the birds. The military is first going after this atoll, which winds up being this creature Gamera, which comes from ancient Atlantis. And eventually the birds are shown to be the greater enemy, and Gamera, with the help of a schoolgirl who he has a psychic connection with, is able to vanquish them.
Yeah. And intercut with a decent amount of scenes of people inside, I guess, people's homes, reading books and looking at computer screens. And there's like some kind of hard sci-fi elements where they talk about the DNA of the monsters and learn that they were constructed, and some really kind of ancient fantasy tropes with, pontificating that this is the creatures from the lost city of Atlantis, or Mu, and the Magatama, which is a kind of element that's recurrent, which is these comma-shaped beads that are part of just, I guess, Japanese myth and legend. They are real things that are in museums. But in this universe, they're used to make a human connection to Gamera that allows him to, fight better and have a connection to humanity.
Yeah, the movies are interesting because they really, compared to the Toho movies that have a lot more of the sort of super science stuff going on, the Gamera series is always much more grounded, and there's a lot more sort of view of how would the military actually respond to this sort of situation. And that's actually one of the things that helped the franchise, because they were able to get more military involvement and cooperation with the filming because of the accurate depictions. And a similar deal with sort of the government bureaucracy thereof, which kind of paved the way to Shin Godzilla. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was remembering Shusuke Kaniko's G-Fest panel. He mentioned how, I think it was Toho got in trouble in Godzilla vs. Mothra 92 because the military attacks the baby Mothra, and that led to the military not wanting to cooperate with the Godzilla crew, and that led them to needing to create G-Force in the next film because they couldn't get that cooperation. Whereas Gamera is the good guy, and I guess that allows the military to work with the kind of monster that you like as opposed to against it, and made things a lot easier for that cooperation. Also, the Gamera movies, from a political perspective, whereas Godzilla is usually about, war or nuclear arms or those kind of, I guess, spicier topics politically. Gamera's politically usually about environmentalism. I think that's probably the most consistent
Yeah,
theme across
yeah.
the three films.
I think that comes up in different ways, but the general idea is that the Earth has a certain amount of life energy to it, and by depleting it, we are inviting monsters to exist there.
Hmm.
Second movie, did you want to take the reins for this one?
Sure, yeah. This is probably the most standalone of the three, but a giant meteor lands on Earth in up in Hokkaido, and it brings with it a host of alien creatures that they kind of, I guess, rapidly expand and take over an area of the planet. They build a giant flower, they call it the Legion flower, to shoot, to like, oxygenate, create a mass explosion, and shoot a seed onto another planet. And that's kind of how they move around. Kind of like real insects in a way, or like, it's very reminiscent of certain plants and insects. So of course Gamera doesn't like this one bit, and he goes in to stop it. The military in this film is still not sure if they should support Gamera or not, but by the time the film ends and after Gamera makes a sacrifice, I think, nearly killing himself trying to stop one of these flowers, the military is able to help him out, which allows them to defeat the Legion and the Legion Mother. But in order to, really finally kill Legion, he has to perform an attack that uses the Earth's mana and depletes it, which sets up kind of the next film.
Which brings us to the grand finale of sorts. I've heard contradictory things about whether or not this was intended to be a true finale or if it was just sort of another step in the franchise at that point. I think the fact that it's called the Incomplete Struggle suggests to me actually that it is a finale, that it's meant to be an ambiguous ending and they weren't really planning to do more of it.
That's how I always interpret it as well. And also based on the ending, like, I mean, these movies look great, but I doubt that even if these movies did really well, Daiei would come up with the budget to create what a true Gamera 4 would look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's well, one of the interesting things that I read while I was doing research was that this actually came out the same day as the very first Digimon movie, and the producers of Gamera, upon seeing the first Digimon movie, immediately thought, oh, well, that's what we need to do with Gamera now, which would have been a very different direction. But if you look at Gamera the Brave, not that different, honestly.
No, makes sense.
But yeah, Gamera 3 is basically, 1999. It's 4 years after the first Gamera, and back in the first Gamera, during this fight in Tokyo, one family was killed off except for the young girl and her little brother. The girl bears a grudge against Gamera for this, and she moves out with some family members in Nara, in little town. She finds a shrine out there. In the shrine, there is an egg. In the egg, there is a monster. She raises the monster. The monster sort of grows attached to her in more than one way, and together the two of them sort of go after Gamera, who is more monstrous in this film because he's no longer has as strong a connection to humanity. Perhaps there's some ambiguity in terms of how much empathy Gamera still has after the connection has been severed in the previous film. But yeah, it's sort of a revenge tale with this, I think, misguided young girl who's controlling a monster, or perhaps being controlled by a monster, to go up against Gamera.
Yeah, and it leaves a lot of things open to interpretation, and it also, I think, has the most upfront mixture of kind of fantasy and religious themes with science fiction, to the point where, like, people are like, oh, this Iris is he's this ancient guardian phoenix, and others like, oh no, he's just a mutated Gyaos. And people in the movie come up with different theories, but there isn't really a final solution proposed.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of folks worked on this trilogy. I think the first and foremost that we have to talk about is the director Shusuke Kaniko. He was at G-Fest when we were giving this panel, so it would have been embarrassing if we'd said anything wrong. But I think he was pretty jet lagged for most of the weekend, so he might not have noticed.
Yeah, he probably didn't figure it out.
Yeah. He was, we think of him as a kaiju guy, but that's just a small part of his filmography. But he is a fan of kaiju work. And he was mostly known for his sort of dramatic romance movies and really got started with a lot of erotic films. And that's a topic that we'll keep coming back to throughout this panel. So apologies if you're sensitive to those sorts of frank discussions. But that's one of the things that I think really helped his career go on, because he got very good at getting performances out of young actresses. And if you look at the Gamera trilogy as a whole, it's very female centric as opposed to most of the other kaiju genre things.
I think even just in terms of I don't know, blockbuster movies worldwide around that time, like to have a trilogy that was, I think you can pretty much say it's female led.
Yeah.
Is pretty unique.
As this wasn't Kaneko's first rodeo with special effects or giant creatures, because he had he had a background in anime initially, so he worked on the anime series Brager, which is the giant robot thing. He did some a TV movie called The Samurai, which had some special effects sequences in it involving a giant sort of robotish creature. He did the Toho vampire movie, My Soul is Slashed, and he was attached to an Ultra Q movie for a little bit, and we'll come back to that later when we talk about influences on the trilogy. But since then he's gone on to a whole lot of stuff, including working on Ultra Q Dark Fantasy and Ultraman Max. Of course, the Godzilla movie that he did, as well as the Death Note duology and many other genre titles.
Yeah, and I correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't My Soul is Slash kind of his breakout mainstream film? I think that was his first big studio picture.
It might have been. I'm not sure. I mean, I guess it depends on how you define studio picture. Like if Nikatsu counts as a studio, then it's not. But if you think about like sort of definitely in like the genre film world, it was.
Yeah, and he does do a lot of genre work. Also, I mean, just if you haven't seen My Soul is Slashed, definitely check it out. I love that movie.
If you happen to own a label that is putting out boutique DVDs, maybe look into that one, because it's never gotten a US release and it deserves one.
It desperately needs a better transfer than what exists.
So we were talking about the erotic films that Kaneko did, and he actually at one point in the past had intended to use Gamera in one of these erotic comedies that he did in the movie Mina Agachao, which I think the official translation is I'm All Yours. There's a scene where the main actress is sort of assaulted by this kaiju, and initially he had approached Daiei to use Gamera in that scene and was flatly turned down. Even though in 1985 Gamera was not at the top of his film career, it was still considered beneath the monster to appear in such work. And that also kind of frames what Kaneko's perception of Gamera was. Like he was a fan of Godzilla, but never was as much a fan of Gamera, and kind of considered them to be goofy. And
yeah, he made it really pretty clear. He was like, I didn't really like Gamera. He thought it was, just for kids. And he which you can't blame him for. It was there was one attempt to make Gamera serious in the Showa era for adults.
And it flopped.
Gamera versus Baragon, and it flopped. And they went back to, making it for kids. In his panel, he specifically called out how, like, the name Gyaos was picked by a child, because it's just, like, Gao, the onomatopoeia for roaring. And he thought that was childish even when he was a kid. So he wasn't a fan.
Yeah, so his first kind of pitch for a Gamera movie was gonna be just a flat out comedy, and that was also turned down. I think it's amazing that Daiei even considered him after he asked if he could use Gamera in a porn movie a decade earlier.
They
But
must not have remembered.
probably not. They might have been some different brass.
Yeah.
But yeah, basically the it was after that he kind of reframed and said, okay, well, what if we do more of a serious adult take on the character? The other fun fact about this movie, Mina Agicho, is that he did also go to Tsuburaya, and Tsuburaya had no problem with loaning them a suit of one of the Ultraman characters to just be in this porn movie. So that's a difference between the studios, I suppose.
Yeah, Subaru's pretty easygoing.
So we talked about Kaneko, the director. Another piece of the puzzle that's very important is the writer, Kasinori Ito. So I've seen a bunch of Ito's works, and I believe you have also. Alex, did you want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Kazunori Ito is a pretty prolific writer of science fiction. Most people know his work from anime. I think that if you're an anime fan growing up in the 90s, Ghost in the Shell and Patlabor were probably his works that you're most familiar with. But he did also work on, Twilight Q, which is a kind of homage of Twilight Zone and Ultra Q. And he, like Kaneko, was almost involved in an Ultra Q movie that I believe we talk about later. Do we?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get into that. Yeah, a lot of people talk about Higuchi and Kaneko when they're talking about the Gamera movies, but really a lot of the tone and themes and a lot of the heart of the trilogy, I think, comes from Ito's screenwriting. And you can see a lot of the groundwork for what would eventually appear in the Gamera trilogy in things like the Patlabor movie and the first and second Patlabor movies. Those are my number one picks. Is if you wanted to watch something from that Ito had written, but we'll get into the stuff that Ito and Kaneko did together because they were partners long before Gamera.
Yeah, actually, their first shared credit goes all the way back to 1981 in the second episode of Urusei Yatsura, which is sort of a zany sci-fi comedy. One of the things that I found when watching that episode that is remarkable, if you've seen the Gamera trilogy, is that this episode ends with this scene of a giant bird monster making a nest in Tokyo Tower at sunset. And that's not part of the original story that they were adapting from the Urusei Yatsura manga. That's a new flourish that I guess Kaneko must have come up with for the anime specifically. And Ito was also involved with the script on that one, but I'm not clear exactly how they worked together on it. He has sort of a vague credit. The two of them also worked on Creamy Mommy, which was a pop idol anime in the early 80s. Pop idols are another big recurring motif in Kaneko's work, although that doesn't necessarily carry over into the Gamera films. But what they really hit it off in writing together was on this movie Necronomicon in 1993. That was actually an international co-production because Brian Yuzna and Christoph Gans sort of also did segments in this anthology, but Ito and Kaneko were able to work together on one of the H.P. Lovecraft stories therein. They also had teamed up for this Ultra Q movie a little before that, but that one did not get made. And again, we'll get back to that when we talk about Ultra Q.
With Ito though, it is, we watch any of those pieces that he's worked on, and you're going to see things like shady government characters and mysticism and all the kind of hallmarks that, especially in Gamera 3, really kind of come to a head in the trilogy. There's even some characters that bear a lot of similarity. So yeah, definitely check those out.
Heading up the effects team, I think the third person that is completely indispensable when talking about the success of the trilogy is Shinji Gucci, who another sort of frequent G-Fest guest. But I don't think people necessarily recognize what a complete sort of all-rounder he is in terms of lots of directing work, lots of storyboarding work, in addition to directing special effects. He sort of got his start working for Daikon Film. People always talk about how he was an assistant working on The Return of Godzilla, but in terms of really having control, it was working on this movie, the Orochi Strikes Again for Daikon Film, which is either the last Daikon film or the first Gainax production, depending on how you count that. He was part of the team at Gainax sort of from its inception, and went on to do some storyboarding on things like Gunbuster. He directed almost half of Nadia Secret of Blue Water, and then also worked on Neon Genesis Evangelion. The main character in Evangelion is actually named after him. But he was doing some other effects work sort of concurrently with all of this. He worked on Mecha Droid at Toho, and Ultraman Powered, which is sort of where he and Ito first really hit it off. But he got around the industry in terms of, he worked on the Ultra Q movie and Peacock King and Tokyo the Last Megalopolis, etc. And he's gone on to a prolific career in both live action and animation. Shin Godzilla probably being the crowning achievement therein, but other works all over the place.
Well, and I think with Higuchi, compared to who we've spoken about so far, he's an example of someone who was explicitly a hardcore uber fan nerd involved in the convention scene and stuff, who then transitioned to being a professional.
Yes, and all three of the folks that we've talked about, Kaniko, Ito, and Higuchi, are dyed-in-the-wool kaiju fans. They are not, kind of nobody was doing this for a paycheck.
Yeah,
they were all,
especially with the Daikon stuff, that was for really really expensive looking promos for conventions that I can't imagine had any budget.
Yeah. The suit maker for the Gamera suits was Tomo Haraguchi. He was actually the director on Mecha Droid, which was, as we just mentioned, Higuchi had done effects for. He'd done some other stuff, including The Samurai, which Kaneko directed, and Legend of the Stardust Brothers and Tokyo the Last Megalopolis, the Akio Jisoji movie. He's gone on to direct the Kibakichi films Sakuya and Death Kappa. Don't hold Death Kappa against him. But he's an amazing suit maker at any rate. And one of the things that I think is really interesting, given that he did this work on Gamera, is there's this comedy from the year prior, Getting Any, from Beat Takashi. And basically this has a scene, it's a zany sex comedy. But the final act of the movie, the main character gets turned into a giant bug, and it's a kaiju movie spoof. How they kill the kaiju at the end of the movie is they have this sports stadium where they pile up this big pile of dung, and then the fly flies onto it and gets captured by a fly swatter. And I think that this is really interesting, given that this comes out right prior to Gamera Guardian of the Universe. I want to know, and I haven't been able to trace this either way, given that the same guy worked on both of these things, whether or not there was a cross-pollination of influence, or if they were doing this to spoof a movie that wouldn't be out for several months still, or what the situation was there.
Yeah, and I think as we move on to My Hero Maeda as well, I think a theme with a lot of this stuff, and the reason we're bringing a lot of these kind of more obscure pieces of media up, is that the strongest influences on the Gamera trilogy really aren't Gamera. It's not the Showa Gamera films. It's the works that these people who created this film trilogy worked on previously. And you can see that here as well. So Mahito Maeda is one of the biggest kind of concept artists and character designers in Japan, specifically for usually for creatures and things like that. And he's worked on some of the biggest films, TV series, anime, and even video games from Japan. And if you can see there, he also worked on a planned anime adaptation of Mad Max, and a lot of those designs got used in what became Fury Road. And looking at the stuff that he did pre-Gamera that had probably the most influence on his designs for Gamera, which were pretty, fantastic, is probably the fact that he worked on Ultraman Powered, which is the American-produced but never aired in America Ultraman television show. And the quality of the series, I'm not going to really talk about, but the creature designs in Ultraman Powered are all reimaginings of classic first generation Ultraman kaiju. So you can see there like Red King and Balton and all of these kind of classic monsters, and he modernized them and made them look really cool and menacing, which is precisely what he did with Gamera. And it's also important to note that Maeda also worked on Evangelion. Maybe there was some contact with Higuchi there. That's part of how he got the gig for Gamera. I'm not sure. But I think that the designs that Maeda did were pretty influential for kaiju in general as a genre. And later on, he went on to design Shin Godzilla. So a pretty important person in terms of the total visual feel of the trilogy.
Yeah, I think you'll hear frequently people talk about how the movies feel like anime, and I think that's a lot because if you look at these people's resumes, there's a lot of doing live action and doing anime, both pretty well in that. Another fellow, Takayuki Takeya, I believe Maeda and Takeya actually went to school together. I think that I could be wrong, but I think that they and Masakazu Katsura and Keita Amemiya were all kind of, if not in the same class, they knew each other. So you'll kind of see a lot of overlap with their various works. Oh yeah, I have a note right there that says classmate of Keita Amemiya. He'd so he worked on Zerum and Cyber Ninja, Kamen Rider Zeto, and would later work on this God Warrior revival with Higuchi and Hideaki Anno, which is a fantastic piece of work. If you haven't checked that out, give it 10 minutes because it's really some of the best tokusatsu work you'll ever see.
Absolutely. And I believe we were trying to figure out exactly what Takeya had worked on in the Gamera trilogy, and I think one of the specific things that was called out was was Iris's nest in Gamera 3. I believe that was all him. So.
Yeah, there's a very famous sculpture, and we'll get back to that a little bit later. I don't think we actually have a picture of it because NSFW, but of Ayana in her cocoon, and that was also one of his sort of concept sculptures there. So
yeah.
The late great Hiroshi Sagai for a lot of the sculpting on the miniature work has worked throughout the industry. So if you look at again another Amemiya piece, Kamen Rider J, or some of the Godzilla movies, worked on TV and both Ultraman and some of the Dai series. Toei series, and just sort of all over the industry, on top of coming up with his own sort of franchise for local monsters, Gotoichi Kaiju. So there's a lot of figures that you can just go out to the store and buy that are actually his sculpts, and I think that's kind of what he would be best known for, but has done lots of special effects, and that's part of the reason why. Just watch the Gamera trilogy and just look at the miniatures. They're doing things that no other franchise really has done, and really pushing the envelope in terms of little details and little flourishes and touches to make things look as realistic as possible, whether it's the things that they are sculpting or the types of paint that they're using or the lighting that they're using. It's just very, very excellent miniature work.
Yeah, yeah, and great photography around it. And I think this is another example of like I don't want to rag on Godzilla, but a lot of times the staff, especially a lot of creative staff on the 90s Godzilla films, were kind of like they only worked on, you know, they're pretty much only known for their Godzilla work.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a lot of people who worked on Gamera were either, you know, reasonably well established as excellent in their field before they worked on Gamera, or later on became, you know, leaders in their field just because, you know, they're excellent at what they do. Like it's just all around top-notch talent.
Yeah, and if you look at the early 90s, Godzilla was basically operating without much competition, but the Gamera franchise was the later part of the 1990s. And we can sort of talk about the social political stuff that's involved with that, but just from a pure movie making standpoint, the later part of the 90s is when you start getting, you know, the Ultraman revival and things like that, where all of a sudden Godzilla is no longer the only game in town, and sort of everybody is competing to deliver the best product possible. So you don't get sort of the autopilot on the miniature effects and things like that you get in the early part of the 1990s.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've got a handful of behind the scenes pictures here. I think when we talked at G-Fest last year, we had some notes about this, but I don't remember necessarily.
Yeah, I don't have anything specific. I mean, the Yumi Kanayama, I'm sure you got notes on that.
She's definitely significant for being the sort of a pioneer for female suit acting, because it was really a boys club, and to some extent still is. But she got some press actually for being the first for this field of female performers. You can really see just the wide variety of scales and types that they were operating with in terms of the various puppets in this storage picture. You know, so many productions would have been satisfied to maybe have, you know, a hand puppet and a suit and maybe a flying model, but they went out of their way to have several available to them and did a good enough job of matching them that it's not immediately obvious when one is being used versus the other, which is another difference from some of the Godzilla work.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah.
So we've got our Gamera suit actors here, Naoki Manabe in the first film, and then Akira Ohashi in the second. We'll talk a little bit more about Ohashi's pedigree as a suit actor in a little bit. People love to talk about this image of how the Legion suit was operated, but I don't know if everyone's necessarily seen it before. That it's kind of the two actors, and it gets compared to a pantomime horse, but I wouldn't necessarily think that that's quite it, because
It's
usually
a weird
with a
looking
pantomime,
horse.
yeah, you don't have the first person completely dragging the second person behind them. That must have just been a nightmare to wear.
Yeah, but totally ingenious. And like, I don't know about you, but I'd watched this movie for years before someone told me how it was done, and like I'd never realized it.
Mm-hmm. And it shows what a beast Yoshida was, that he was able to sort of, this is probably a 300-pound costume or something that he's dragging around with an extra person behind him.
Yeah, without much access to air.
Yeah. And Hirofumi Fukuzawa as the third Gamera. So we don't have the same Gamera actor from film to film. Akira Ohashi again in the Iris costume. Apparently he didn't really have to do much as Iris, just kind of just sort of sit there and let the tentacles do their thing, which is different from Gamera. The Gamera suit had a lot of flexibility in terms of being able to move the head back and forth, and the actors were able to do a fair amount of emoting, and that's one of the things that got better from film to film. But Iris, being a weird tentacle beast, just kind of had to show up. Handful more behind the scenes pictures. I don't think we have to spend a whole lot of time on this, because if you get the Blu-ray set, there's so much behind the scenes material that's included. It's pretty wild, actually. You can watch this stuff being filmed as opposed to just the still pictures of it. We did want to call out how much natural light that they used by filming outside, and that gives a very different sort of effect compared to the this more studio bound pictures.
Yeah, in the '90s films, I think it was only the big pool shots that would have natural light for Godzilla.
Yeah, I mean they still did use studios for some of it, but they filmed outside considerably more, and I think that goes back to Higuchi's sort of upcoming in the independent scene where he didn't really have a studio inside to blow stuff up in.
Yeah.
So we talked about the big flower in Gamera 2, and that's very much a nod to the mammoth flower from, I want to say, episode 4 of Ultra Q. Is that right?
Something like that. Yeah, I believe so. I watched it recently, so I should have remembered, but I kind of binged them, so.
Sure, yeah. And it honestly doesn't matter. Like, yeah, go for the Ultra Q episode called Mammoth Flower, and that'll be the one.
Yeah, that one probably has the mammoth flower in it.
Yeah, good chance. But yeah, this is another bit of sort of giving their nods away. The other piece of the second movie was apparently the 1954 movie Them with giant ants, and they have a whole sequence in the movie where they just explain how ant colonies work, and that's sort of meant to make us accept the way that the Legion creatures are performing. Another fun fact. Did you want to take this one?
I think you may have I don't have notes on this one.
Oh, okay. Well, this is basically just that in Gamera 3, the climax is at the Kyoto station, and this was it wasn't initially supposed to. It was supposed to be at Kiyomizu Temple, and the idea there is that this is a very iconic building that most Japanese people would know about. There's even an idiom of doing something brave is called diving from Kiyomizu Temple. But Higuchi went to Kyoto to scout out the location. On his way there, he passed through the newly opened train station, which is a massive building, and he just thought, this would be a great thing to destroy. So basically, he went to Kaneko. He had a temper tantrum and said he wanted to destroy Kyoto Station, and the rest was history. And it's I think it makes it a much more memorable sequence, sort of housing it in this much more cavernous location than sort of the outside near the temple. And as a result, you'll still sometimes see people make jokes about the scene in pop culture.
Yeah, I mean it's also one of those rare monster fights that's technically indoors. Became quite famous. I can talk a bit about Otani.
Sure.
A pretty prolific composer in anime. And I think, at least in the West, most famously known for his work on Shadow of the Colossus, which is the PlayStation 2 video game where you run around hunting down kaiju. And what's interesting about the fact that he's so well known for Shadow of the Colossus is if you listen to the scores, there's a lot of notes taken from his Gamera score. So Shadow of the Colossus came out in I want to say 2004. So it was after he worked on Godzilla even. Because he did eventually work on Godzilla, Mothra King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack. So it seems like he was hired for Shadow of the Colossus because of his work on Godzilla and Gamera. But yeah, lots of anime. Gundam Wing, he did the music for that. And he also worked on some films with Kaneko before the Gamera series and later on after. And if you listen, I think Pyrokinesis is also another one of his soundtracks that has a lot of similarities to what you might hear in Gamera 3, but he's pretty prolific and pretty, I don't know what the word is. He could do a lot of different types of orchestrations, a lot of different flavors. So yeah, pretty well known.
Yeah, he's one of the guys that I love Kenji Kawai for an example, but when I listen to Kenji Kawai, it's always immediately like, oh, this is Kenji Kawai doing the Kenji Kawai thing. Whereas Otani, he's got a lot of range, and sometimes it doesn't dawn on you until a certain motif comes up, like, oh, this is an Otani score.
Yeah, and sometimes it doesn't. Like sometimes I was like I wouldn't have recognized this as Otani if I didn't know.
Yeah, he is noteworthy. He mixes a lot of sort of Eastern and Western musical motifs. So he'll bring in like scaling from sort of non-Western. I'm not a music expert, so this is one of the things that Steve handled on the panel and did a fantastic job of sort of explaining about, and I'm just gonna
Yeah,
try to remember what it was, but the usual like octave scales don't necessarily exist in traditional Japanese music. So like if you look at like Iris's theme, it doesn't pair exactly onto a typical sort of sheet music or something like that. Um, and and then he also uses a lot of synth, which is a direct contrast to a lot of the more traditional, either the classical or the jazzy that you would have normally have heard in the genre before this.
and also I mean a bit of an aside, but when so Team Eco hired him to work on Shadow of the Colossus, which became quite popular because of his work on Godzilla and Gamera. But before that, they hired Michiru Oshima to do the soundtrack for Eco, and then she later went on to do a bunch of Godzilla movies. So there's some weird connection there. I haven't checked out Last Guardian, but maybe that has another kaiju composer involved.
Well, if not yet, then maybe someday down the road.
Yeah.
Uh, so Tani wasn't the only person to do music for the trilogy officially, because if you look at the first and second movie, they had these theme songs where it sort of goes into a pop song towards the end credits. And there was a thread a little while ago where we were talking about the first movie has this end theme myth from Bakufu Slump, who are a pretty prolific pop outfit in Japan, and they had done they'd done a lot of other things, including the ending theme to Ultraman Tiga shortly after the first Gamera movie came out. But what I thought was really neat is the lyrics to the song Myth are, they're about the pain of growing up and so on and so forth. But it was really written as an image song. So this is a song sort of done as a tribute to the TV drama Nighthead. So what had happened was the director of Nighthead, George Ida, they worked with him previously on the movie Battle Heater, which is a crazy movie about a killer table heater. That's a thing that exists in Japan. It's like a table that you sit at. That's a monster in this movie. So they'd composed the theme for that, and they really clicked. They decided that they loved his work, and then later he had this TV series Nighthead, which you would probably only know in the States if you watch the anime Nighthead Genesis, which is kind of connected somehow. But they composed a song that was supposed to be from the perspective of the characters in this TV series, and then that song was used as the ending credits to Gamera Guardian of the Universe. So both Nighthead and Gamera involve psychic characters. I don't know if that's necessarily relevant to the lyrics thereof, though. The song for the second Gamera, Sky or Sora by Ulfuls, was a little bit more straightforward of just sort of a pop song, but they did get to film their music video on the set. So that music video is included on the Blu-ray set. For when I was putting this presentation together, I could just find it on really grainy quality on Nico Nico, which is why this image is not very good here. So a couple of other noteworthy folks that worked on the trilogy. We've talked a little bit about Mizuho Yoshida and Akira Ohashi as suit actors, but I think it's interesting that on top of playing Gamera and Legion, Yoshida played Zeram when Ohashi was playing Iria in the Zeram movies, and then in 2001 Yoshida played Godzilla and Ohashi played Ghidorah. So those two just seem to constantly be in the cycle of being in rubber suits fighting each other. one credit that is just absolutely fantastic is that there's a person that's credited as a decorator. I'm assuming that means he's a set decorator or something like that, but it's Keiichi Hasigawa. And Hasigawa would go on to be a big name in well, both in the anime and live action industry because he wrote Ultraman Dyna and Ultraman Nexus and eventually the SSSS Gridman anime.
That never gets easier to say.
It doesn't, no. And yeah, aside from that, Fuyuki Shinada and Shinichi Wakasa, both prolific sculptors and suit makers, they contributed to some of the sculpting that went on with the Gamera trilogy, so they are well worth mentioning here as well.
Okay.
Yeah, take it away.
Sure, yeah. So Ayaka Fujitani plays Asagi, who is she's the star in the first film, and she still is a very important role in the later two films, especially the third. And she's the woman who kind of makes that connection with Gamera. So she's, believe it or not, is the daughter of Steven Seagal. So she's half Japanese and half whatever Steven Seagal is. I don't remember. And her first film was actually Guardian of the Universe. And the same year as Gamera Guardian of the Universe, she also appeared in Gamera the Time Adventure, which you can see. That's where that image comes from. She was dressed up as an alien. I think we talk a bit about that a bit later, but it's a weird full motion video thing that was made to promote Guardian of the Universe. She's been in some other movies since Michel Gondry's Tokyo, Hideki Anno's Ritual, and she was also in Ultraman Max, I believe, in the episode that Kaneko directed.
Yeah, I kind of wonder with her being half American if that was in any way intended to evoke. If you look at the Gamera movies, basically from Virus to Zigra, all of them have these half American children in them, and I wonder if that was something that occurred to them in the casting process, or if they were just kind of like, eh.
Maybe. I don't know how exactly she specifically got involved, but yeah, it might have played a factor in it.
Yeah, I believe Matt Frank talks about that in his audio commentary a bit in terms of her casting, but I don't remember the details, so I won't embarrass myself any further.
Shinobu Nakayama, people recognize from Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. She plays Professor Nagamine in the first film, and then she returns for the third film. And she actually won some awards for her acting in the first film. I mean, the film, the Gamera Guardian Universe won a good number of Japanese film awards when it came out, due to things like special effects, but also for Nakayama's performance. So she was quite well regarded and famous, and I think also, she was a bit of a hot actor at the time.
Yeah, I mean, she was just coming off of the Jet Li movie, also the Fist of Legend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this brings us to Yukijiro Hotaru, who is one of my favorites. I will play a Yukijiro Hotaru drinking game sometimes. If I see him in a movie, which happens more often than one would necessarily think. I was just watching Neo Ultra Cube the other day, and like, oh, there he is.
There he is.
He's been all over tokusatsu work. He didn't really start off that way. He was again one of these porn actors initially, but sort of got into special effects stuff when he became the main villain in the show Poitrine. From there, he landed a lead role in Keita Amemiya's movie Zerum, again with Mizuho Yoshida playing the monster there, and kind of took on more and more science fiction roles based on that. His mentor was actually Yukitaro Hotaru, who was in Gamera versus Gauss. So that was kind of what got him interested in potentially playing a role in the Gamera film that was basically a remake of Gamera versus Gauss. And from there, he shows up in all of the subsequent movies, including the fan films. So he's one of those guys that does not say no to much, and you'll see him all over the cinematic landscape.
Yeah, especially the genre stuff, and he was always one of my favorite characters in the trilogy.
So here's where we get into a fun
Yes.
conversation of so what are the ingredients here that really went in to shape the Gamera trilogy?
Yeah, yeah, because there are a lot. And like we said before, it is the biggest influences on the Gamera trilogy aren't Gamera. It's everything else that these people may have worked on. Yeah, so I mean, you look at say Kasinori Ito. He worked on a lot of, like we mentioned, a lot of anime with kind of methodical science and fantasy tropes, and a lot of his movies feature characters, poring over books to fit together, puzzle pieces involving, government or technology or science or, ancient mythology. And especially you see this in Gamera 3, where like that stronger philosophical slant fits in pretty in line with his previous work on Ghost in the Shell, Pat Labor and Pat Labor 2. And he also wrote an episode for Twilight Q, like we mentioned, which is that kind of homage to Twilight Zone, Ultra Q, those kind of things. And I think it's worth talking a bit about the Ultra Q the movie, because it's a bit of an interesting moment, because Ito and Kaneko were both supposed to be working on Ultra Q the movie, and from what I understand, that fell apart pretty early. It's not clear how involved they ever were before it got handed over to Akio Jisoji. And earlier this year, the film finally got fan subbed and released in English. And it's its own film. It's still quite a unique film, but there are a lot of elements that definitely feel like an Ito script. And there are a lot of, visual things like the Magatama and ancient civilizations that tie into what ends up, happening in Gamera. And Ultra Q, the movie, was 1990, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So predates it by a couple of years.
Yeah, to make it clear, like the draft that Ito had for Ultra Q was very different. It was an anthology and had some of the classic Ultraman monsters in it. But I cannot imagine that they had their draft and it got turned down and they just decided, okay, well, we're just not going to watch the final product that comes out then. I think that they must have been watching the Ultra Q movie as it developed from there, and they would have seen it. And there's no way to not make that connection in terms of sort of the ancient civilizations, the tying things in with the lost culture that has developed monsters and things like that. So
yeah, absolutely. I think another huge influence on the trilogy as a whole, especially from the Shinji Gucci end of things, is while he was known for his special effects work I think that his work as a storyboard artist on Neon Genesis Evangelion had a huge influence on his work on Gamera. The framing, the composition, lighting, and the dramatic action really set the tone for what Higuchi would later do, especially in Gamera 3. And this connection between his anime and live action work would really solidify with Giant God Warrior Appears in Tokyo and Shin Godzilla. And just to be clear for people who aren't familiar with exactly what a storyboard artist does, they really are responsible for creating the beats, the visual beats of what you see on screen. And so when it comes to action work, it's really a storyboarder that's doing a lot of the heavy lifting and choreography and framing, especially in animation. So I think some people hear, oh, he was a storyboard artist on Evangelion. Well, that's not that big a deal, but it's actually huge, especially given how iconic a lot of the animation and sequences in that series are.
Yeah, he also did some of the scripting for it, didn't he?
I think he did a bit. I always knew him mostly for the storyboard work, but he was involved, I think, pretty heavily, especially because of his relationship with Anno.
Yeah, he did direct half of Nadia: The Secret of Blue Water, which is in some ways formative for Evangelion, but it's also noteworthy for Gamera in that it's about ancient Atlantean empirical stuff coming back to haunt modern day or modern when that series is set. But with Evangelion, it's fascinating to watch the Gamera trilogy with Evangelion fans because they'll be like that Leonardo DiCaprio in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood pointing at the screen like, oh. So
his hand became fire? What?
yeah. And we'll talk about this a little bit later as well, but the creator of Evangelion, Hideaki Anno, who also did Shin Godzilla, he directed the making of for Gamera 3, which was sadly not included in the Arrow box set, but I think that there's some sort of circular influence that's going on, and especially if you look at the time periods, like Gamera came out, then Evangelion came out, then Gamera 2 came out in the span of a year. It's very the idea that there wasn't a whole lot of like overlap there is unfathomable. So when you see,
and then End of Evangelion was 97, right?
Yeah. So when you see things like at the end of Gamera Guardian the Universe, Gauss shoots this vertical beam straight up in the air, and you're like, okay, well this is like when Gauss gets thrown into the volcano in the original movie. Yes, but it's also like when the angels in Evangelion get destroyed, they turn into these crosses made out of light that shoot straight up as a yellow beam. It's a very similar visual. The Vanishing Fist is said to be an homage to the Shaw Brothers movie, the One-Armed Boxer. But in Evangelion, especially in the rebuild movies, they take a very similar visual, I think, as a nod to Gamera. And then the biggest influence that Evangelion had is it kicked off this boom of what are called Seikaike series. So these are things where the main character, and if this is anime, it's usually a teenager, has really messed up emotional state, but their emotional state is directly attached to the state of the world. Like the entire world will be destroyed unless they get their emotions sorted out. And that, I think, is the heart of Gamera 3 as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else to say on the Evangelion front?
I mean, Maharu Maeda, who designed the kaiju in Gamera, he worked on. I think he went from Ultraman powered to Evangelion to Gamera, one after another. So he did. I only have him as credited for like one major monster design in Evangelion that I know of, which is the aquatic angel that I had the photo of. But I mean, it super. Like I mentioned before, his work on Gamera or on Ultraman definitely had an influence on what he did with Gamera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've talked a good bit about the Kasinori Ito's background. One other thing that I feel like we gotta mention, because everybody talks about like how how his big movie was Ghost in the Shell, which came out in 1995. Gamera also came out in 1995. Both of these movies star young women. Like the main young woman character has a last name Kusanagi. Kusanagi is not a very common name in Japan. It's there are people with that name, but it's to the point where the creator of Ghost in the Shell, Masamune Shiro, said about his main character in Ghost in the Shell, "Oh, that's an obvious pseudonym." So I think that there must have been some channeling of that Ghost in the Shell work that was going on with the writing of the Gamera script, and I think that ties in a little bit because the Kusanagi is the name of a sword. It's one of the three imperial treasures in Japan, and if you look at the three treasures, you have the sword, you have the bead, which is similar to the Magatama that we associate with the movie, and then you have the mirror, which sort of looks like a tortoise shell. So I feel like there's intentionally something that's going on there to tie these three together symbolically. That's me playing the main character in Ultra Q the movie to tie all of the pieces together here.
Yeah, I was about to say this is one of the new slides for 2020, and it's definitely Would you say that the work on the Ultra Q fan sub had some assistance in this
It
realization?
might have gotten my mind going in that direction. Yeah. Uh, so there's a lot of religious and mythological, and depending on who you ask, one thing might be religious, one thing might be mythological, motif wise in throughout the trilogy. They explicitly do this with the guardian beasts in Gamera 3, where you have the tortoise from the north is Genbu, and then the phoenix from the south is Suzaku. Uh, there's also the white tiger, Byako, and the dragon Seiryu that don't really play part in the Gamera thing, unless you maybe look at one of the comics that Matt Frank did.
Yeah.
But
Well, and wasn't there an official manga that kind of cast Baragon as the tiger?
oh, that might be the case, yeah, in the Kondo manga.
Yeah, because
Yeah, that
I mean I've never read it, but I believe it's supposed to be in continuity, you know.
yeah, that might very well be the case. I actually have not read it myself.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, that's a part of Chinese astrology that gets pulled into the symbolism that's going on there, along with the whole the notion that in the world of Gamera there aren't any turtles. Uh, you could tie it back to the Indian mythological idea of the whole world is resting on the back of a turtle. They don't explicitly do that in the films, but it's one of those symbolic things. If you think of Gamera as this champion of the whole Earth, sort of defending it from everything that would threaten it, then you can maybe make that case together a little bit more explicitly. The prophecies of Nostradamus was a big thing in Japan in the 70s. Gamera 1999, the third movie taking place in 1999 is no coincidence there. Everybody thought that the world was going to end in the summer of 1999, and they kind of have this very apocalyptic image to end the movie off on. That all, clicks together. And then the second movie is just the one that goes all into the Christian symbolism, where
Yeah.
Gamera sacrifices himself and then is resurrected. The enemy that he's fighting against is Legion, which is of course the biblical reference of the Legion of Demons or whatever. And even in the opening credits, Gamera, the Me is sort of skewed, so it looks like a Christian cross. So they were really tapping into that there. What does all this mean? Well, Evangelion has a lot of religious symbolism.
Well, I think with the trilogy and especially with three, I know a lot of people get a little confused as to what's going on, and I think a lot of it has to do with that cultural context.
Hmm.
And because especially with turtles, like in the West, we don't really associate turtles with anything super grandiose or spiritual. But in Asian countries, and especially in Asian mythology or Asian religions, it's a lot more revered, right? So
Yeah.
uh, I feel like there's a certain elements lost in translation. And I mean, I haven't watched the Gamera 3 commentary, so maybe this all gets explained, but I feel like you almost need a little accompanying book to explain a lot of the historical and mythological elements of what's going on in that film to better understand it.
And there, in fairness, there was a lot of changing of the script as that was going along, and that's kind of why some of the things like Iris's origin seems to be ambiguous,
Hmm.
and the role of there's this government shrine maiden that sort of kidnaps the main character at one point in that movie, and the main battle was originally supposed to take place at a temple, but did not. It still takes place in Kyoto, which is sort of the spiritual center of Japan. But there's a lot that's sort of going on there in terms of things to unpack, and I don't know that I necessarily have the best qualifications to do so outside
Yeah,
of what I've kind of gleaned from popular culture.
you should just sick Justin on it for like a couple months and
Yeah.
see what he comes up with.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Go bug Justin Mullis at him, and he'll tell you what you need to know about Japanese
He'll
religion.
point you to a book probably that's very dense, but will, prepare you for that.
Oh yeah, I'm sure somebody's written about this to greater extent than we are prepared for.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, one of the only things that the Gamera trilogy maintains from the original series is Gamera's origin,
Yes.
which is interesting, but they mess with it a bit. Yeah, so there was another big influence on Gamera, and it was another gigantic blockbuster film featuring, well, science fiction and I guess you could say monsters, and that's Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park's influence on blockbuster filmmaking as a whole really can't be understated. Uh, but the influences on Gamera are kind of more on the nose. They're kind of almost specific call outs, like the focus on DNA decoding, and the teases of the Gyaos on the island when they start picking off villagers, and of course like digging through a giant pile of turd. That was something that seems specifically lifted out of Jurassic Park. But this mostly applies just for Guardian of the Universe. The later films are not really pulling from Jurassic Park, but there does seem to be some influence from other American sci-fi blockbusters.
Yeah, I mean the fact that this was 2 years earlier, I can't necessarily blame them, but that is one thing that every time I watch Guardian of the Universe, especially that island scene where somebody's fleeing in the rain, it just the Jurassic Park fingerprints are just all over it there. So
Yeah.
gotta roll with it.
I mean, Godzilla did that to an extent as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm not gonna fault the trilogy for that.
Yeah.
It's especially when
Everyone in blockbuster movies looked to Jurassic Park.
it's not as egregious as your main character getting chased by the Terminator or a boulder. Let's put it that way.
Or having a bunch of space monkeys.
Yes. So this wasn't part of our G-Fest presentation, but I figured, while we're at it, why the heck not?
G-Fest After Dark.
Yes, exactly. Everybody kind of acknowledges this, but they usually kind of shy away from the discussion thereof, and that is Iris is a tentacle monster. They specifically said that they wanted the scene where Ayana and Iris, where she talks about how she's getting so hot and she starts taking her shirt off and Iris wraps its tentacles all around her. They said that they wanted that to be like a lovemaking scene. Initially, the plan was for Ayana to be completely nude inside of Iris, and I think it was wise for multiple reasons for Kaneko to ultimately say like, no, let's have her be clothed. In terms of like, if you ever wanted to sell this movie outside of Japan, outside of the weird sort of anime set, also the actress was what 16 or 15 or something like.
Yeah,
That's not appropriate. But the Gamera was a Daiei property, and if you look at stuff that was selling well for Daiei in the mid 90s, they were moving a lot of copies of La Blue Girl. People will say like, oh, tentacle hentai. La Blue Girl is specifically the title that's going on here. And if you buy things like some of the Gamera books that were put out in the 90s talking about like Daiei special effects films, you will see they'll just go into like full La Blue Girl spreads that are right next to the Gamera spreads. Or if you look at some of the advertising materials, it's like big hits for 1995 or 1996. It's like Gamera La Blue Girl. And yeah, you got these tentacle molestation movies where female ninjas get ravaged by these tentacle creatures covered in slime, and there's a lot of Daiei was not that big a studio. People got around in there. As the example that we have here is that the La Blue Girls cinematographer is the same one that worked on Shall We Dance. Like this is not like a little like side project that nobody was aware of what was going on. So when we look at this, especially knowing the background in kind of the sketchier sides of cinema, shall we say, in the erotic film works, I don't think you can ignore this as an influence here. And if you look at some of the art books for Gamera 3, an example would be like the Vanishing Book, things like that. They full out have very lewd art of Ayana and Iris, together in very X-rated situations, and this is officially sanctioned product. So that's I understand the tendency to sweep this under the rug, especially when you're dealing with an all ages crowd. But since we're putting this for YouTube, I think we can just say like, yeah, this is definitely a thing that was going on with the studio at the time. And when we talk about how this is very anime inspired, well, this is a part of it also.
This is one part, and it's also like when you watch it, it's pretty on the nose.
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of supplementary material that came out with the Gamera trilogy. One of the biggest ways to tie into a product is with comic books, and for Gamera there are quite a few. The first one that came out, it actually came out before the movie did, was this trade paperback collection by Hurricane Ryu, who you would know as the suit actor from the Godzilla series, but he's also quite an accomplished manga author and kind of a maniac. So his manga, it's just really called Giant Monster Gamera, is completely insane, and it sort of ties the Showa stuff and the Heisei stuff together. It has cameos by things throughout the Gamera franchise, including monsters that weren't made, and just any wild idea you've ever had. If you've ever wanted to see Gamera pick up Giron and use him as a sword, it happens. If you want to see a super Gauss that has elements of all of the different kaiju like put together into one creature, that happens. It's really out there. I'd love to see this get translated. I understand why it would be a bit of an undertaking, though. One thing that would not take a lot of effort to translate, because it doesn't have any dialogue, is this short called Myth by Mahiro Maeda. So we talked about Maeda before. He actually had a short, full-color Gamera prequel comic that just kind of shows things that were going on in Atlantis before the events of the movie. That was included in one of the Gamera books, so you might be able to find that around.
Yeah. It's actually the book itself that it's in has a lot of production material and concept art from Maeda. But just because I don't have it, is this not included in the Arrow set?
This is not included in the Arrow set, no.
Good to know.
The Dark Horse comics we'll talk about in a little bit. There's a Gamera Gaiden 2.5. I don't know a whole lot about this. I haven't been able to track that one down. I know it has an aquatic Gauss in it. This is one of the short stories that was just as part of a comic anthology that was out at the time. You mentioned before the Gamera versus Baragon comic that was done. That sort of retells the events of Gamera versus Baragon, but set in the Heisei continuity, I think between Gamera 2 and Gamera 3. And this is by Kazuhisa Kondo, who is most well known for his work on the Gundam manga. So I really dig the art style in it. It's got a cool redesign for Baragon that really feels as one with the Heisei look and feel.
Yeah, and this is the one, like I mentioned. I mean, I also haven't read it, but I believe Baragon is cast as one of the 4 guardian beasts.
Yeah, I could kind of see him being the tiger if you look at the art on the screen there.
the way he's drawn here, yeah. If you look at the old school Baragon, maybe not so much, but this one, yeah.
There's a short comic, Gamera versus Morphos, by Nenpei Mu. That's basically about a mad scientist who creates a blob monster that takes on the form of Gamera, and the two of them fight each other. If you look around, you might find some scanlations of that. Just gonna say.
I wonder where.
Yeah, it could be anywhere. It feels very sort of Showa. One of the things that we loved is that at the end of that, the scientist that has created the monster is like, oh, it was presumptuous of humankind to have created such a thing, and we're like, by humankind you mean you, right? And then one of the things that is included on the Arrow set is this comic, The Last Hope, that Matt Frank did. And this is fun because he did that as a doujinshi. It was a fan project. It wasn't anything that was supposed to be official. But because of his publisher putting things out in Japan, when they did a reprint of the Dark Horse comics there, they approached him and asked if he would be okay with their doujinshi being included. And I guess as a result, it became an official licensed Gamera manga. And now, through weird happenstance, it has been included in the Arrow set. So this American comic that was done as a fan project that officially got released in Japan has been reverse imported back to America again. So it's a little comic that could, and it's again one of those prequels that talks about the sort of the before times for the Gamera franchise and what happened in Atlantis. So how canon is it? I guess it's canon fully. Shrug, question mark.
It's as canon as you want it to be.
Yeah, that's a good attitude to have. Along those lines, also included in the Arrow set as the 4-part miniseries that was done by Dark Horse Comics. This was immediately following. I think there's a little bit of overlap actually between their run on the Godzilla comics and the run on the Gamera comics. But this is one that Jessica covered in the panel. She is the comics historian. They also covered in their Kaiju Conline panel. I am probably a little less harsh on this than they are. I think that it's the art might not necessarily be fantastic, especially by today's framing, but it's something that for a work done in the mid 90s, it was very standard. So there's the covers for these were all the Yuji Kaida promotional art for Gamera Guardian of the Universe, and the interior art does not look like that.
Kaida, another fan turned professional.
Yes, but a lot of the time, interior art for American comics doesn't necessarily match up with what is on the pages inside. And this does have the issue where they have their original character who shows up to kind of get events going. So it's almost a little bit like the deal with Steve Martin in the original Godzilla, where we need this American here to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, because it's like it's like a splinter from Gamera Guardian of the Universe, right? If I remember correctly, it starts off kind of in line and then starts going into its own direction.
Yeah, well, it's a sequel to Gamera Guardian of the Universe.
It came out in 96.
Yeah, so it was an awkward release because most people would not have been able to see the movie before the comic came out. And there's a synopsis of the movie that's included in the comic, but I don't know if that's going to necessarily be enough for general audiences to get on board with it, unless they're already hardcore kaiju fans, which a lot of people, in fairness, are.
Yeah, but I mean, even back then, Guardian of the Universe didn't get a theatrical release in the States until when? Do you remember?
I think it was 97.
Yeah, and it didn't get a video release until, I want to say 98. That's correct.
Yeah, it's probably 98. I don't know for sure about that.
Yeah.
But
like it was kind of at this time where the only other Gamera content was basically old tapes and like Mystery Science Theater. Or had they even done their episodes yet?
Yeah, Mystery Science Theater had already done their episodes at this point. But I think that also sort of framed the content of this. Because if you look at it with the full Gamera trilogy in mind, it feels very incongruous because you have, a virus and Zigra and this space alien woman who comes in a giant blimp ship and things like that. And that feels really goofy compared to the rest of the Gamera trilogy. But if you remember that at the time when this was written, the frame of reference was the Showa Gamera movies, this all makes a lot more sense because you might be looking at the reboot and sort of expect it to continue looking like Gamera movies instead of going off in its own direction like it did.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at Guardian of the Universe in the same way that you look at Gamera versus Gauss, which is relatively serious compared to Gamera versus Giron, and expect a similar trajectory there, then this, in my mind, is very appropriate. But in retrospect, now it feels kind of out of line because the alien invasion and mad scientists and cloning and all of that is a little bit out of place. And then there's also the way that characters are portrayed. The way that Asian people are drawn is not perhaps how we would do that today. And sort of characters getting sidelined.
It's a very 90s comic. Like I don't know how else to say it. It is a very 90s.
Well, look at
and everything that entails.
Look at the muscle-bound guy gritting his teeth right there. It's like
I believe that is actually the comic version of Asagi. So
yes.
So if you've seen the movies and you like, that's how they render her in the comic.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not how you expect, but I always found it interesting as this kind of like bizarro alternate reality trajectory of the Gamera series, because they only had the first movie to work off and then they just went from there.
And I mean, if you want to get real technical, like this still could have hypothetically happened. it would feel this congruous, because like nobody mentioned how Paris got destroyed, but nobody mentioned how Paris didn't get destroyed. So
Exactly. I mean, to be fair, the legendary Godzilla comics are no better.
Yeah, absolutely.
I also this is the last. I mean, this and the toy line from Trendmasters that we'll talk about. I think it's the last time there was really any major North American developed Gamera stuff.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, there's a little bit of buzz about a cartoon, but I don't know how seriously to take that. Whether that's just the pure rumor.
The Cartoon Network cartoon?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm gonna I think I know someone at Cartoon Network, so I'm gonna ask them. But I believe, I mean, that was a real announcement.
Okay.
Just did not go anywhere.
I'd be very curious to see exactly what details we could dig up on that, because that's quite the what if.
Yeah.
We mentioned the toy line, so we might as well go ahead on this. Again, Trendmasters, much like they had done Godzilla, much like how Godzilla had been done by Dark Horse previously, and they just segue from Godzilla into Gamera. I don't know if there's maybe an opening for licensing, or if they wanted to diversify, knowing that the upcoming American Godzilla was going to maybe throw a monkey wrench into their abilities, or maybe just to reignite interest for Gamera and they wanted to get on the ground floor. But I kind of dig these figures, honestly. They're a little bit goofy. They all have like launching projectiles and things, but as reimaginations of these classic characters, which Trendmasters is wont to do, I like them. They kind of remind me of McFarlane's toys from around the same time.
Yeah, I like these toys as well. They've kind of got a more detailed, kind of dry brushed look to them that I thought was always pretty neat. But I mean, it was also it was a weird, just really weird timing, and I don't quite understand what happened behind the scenes to make these happen.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was also, I mean, these were 98, right?
Yeah, I think these were announced right alongside the Godzilla the series toys that never manifested.
Yeah, so it was one of their last lines, and there wasn't, the comic was years before this, and it ended after 4 issues. And the movies, I mean, I guess maybe the VHS release of Guardian of the Universe may have prompted this.
Mm-hmm.
But it was kind of, it felt like there was a lot of interest from licensors to bring Gamera overseas, but none of them could coordinate very well. So you've got one person gets the home video rights, one person gets theatrical rights, one entity gets the comic books, and one entity gets the toys, and they all kind of released them whenever was best for them, and it kind of didn't coordinate very well.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind is as this was happening on the U.S. side in the around 2000, Daiei was again in not great shape,
Yeah.
and that sort of prompted the sale of the studio from Tokuma over to Kadokawa, and the relaunch that happened in 2006. But so I kind of wonder if maybe either there's somebody that was pushing things on the US side that kind of had to stop because of the acquisition, or if something just got lost in the shuffle, as there was turmoil at the studio,
Yeah.
or just general lack of interest because people were expecting Godzilla 98 to be much more of a thing than it wound up being.
Yeah, that could also be a big factor.
A cool extra that I would love to see get, some sort of. I doubt that it would ever get a standalone translated release, but maybe a fan sub or something like that. There is this in-universe documentary that came out in between Gamera 2 and Gamera 3 that kind of talks about the science and history and mythology and things of the world. Called Gigantic Creature Council. So this was released in Japan as a standalone DVD, and it's just a mockumentary, so it's a bunch of talking heads kind of explaining things. You're not going to see any fantastic special effects or anything along those lines, but it's the fact that it exists and could perhaps shed some light on the things that go on in Gamera theory is really interesting to me, and just talking about what is Iris, etc. Could be pretty handy, and learn about Mu and whatnot.
Yeah, I was. This was the one thing I was like desperately hoping would be included on the Arrow set, but I also wasn't surprised when it was not included.
Yeah, I'm sure it's in a weird place legally speaking, as so many of these sort of things that were done as throwaway bonuses when they were created would be.
Yeah.
People might not have been paying very close attention, ever expecting it to be reissued or properly mastered, etc.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it, like, whatever contracts that Kadokawa got when they acquired Daiei, they probably didn't have this specifically listed out.
Actually, do you know who wrote and directed this thing?
I do not actually. I don't think it was anybody that was that sort of caught my attention when I was looking it up.
Yeah, interesting.
Another fun little bit of trivia that came up as a tie-in for Gamera is in 1996 at the Hero Festival, which was an event in Japan. They had several live performances, including stage shows, but one of the shows that they had was a puppet show. And if you've watched the series Godziban on YouTube with the adorable Godzilla puppets, you'll know the work of Atelier Koganemushi, and they have been in the business for a very long time. Going back, in fact, to 1996, they had a puppet show for this Hero Festival where Gamera, Ultraman, Kamen Rider, and Godzilla all meet each other, and I just think that must have been fantastic because their work is adorable. These are puppets, but they're very big puppets. It's hard to tell because of the nature of these images. The Gamera puppet was about 3 feet tall, and the Ghidorah puppet was almost 6 feet tall. So they're the very big puppets, which probably helps the audience see them. But I don't know if any footage of this has survived. I'm sure in terms of releasing it, it would be a logistical nightmare because you have 4 different studios characters all running into each other. But
Yeah.
same deal with the stage shows that they had at the event as well. But it looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it's a shame because those studios, especially Toho, they do not like to acknowledge the existence of any crossover content, even if it was official.
Mm-hmm.
They really do not like to pretend it exists.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed in this image here that completely not related to Gamera, that little Godzilla has a frill like Jiris. So I think that they've probably had some sort of gag about that.
Yeah, you gotta wonder.
But
even
yeah,
that's a weird situation for another times the Super IS stuff.
but people always ask, has there ever been a Godzilla versus Gamera crossover? Like, yes, and not just the one in 1970. There was also one in 1996. Now we can get into video games, and this is where I think I should stop talking and let you take the steering wheel entirely.
Sure, yeah. So there are, I mean, you could argue that every Gamera video game is a Heisei game because pretty much that's the de facto appearance of Gamera when it comes to licensing nowadays. Uh, but there were actually two games that launched with the release of the film. So one of them was for the Game Boy called Gamera Guardian of the Universe, and one of them was for the Super Famicom or Super Nintendo as it's called here, called Gamera Gyaos Destruction Strategy. So the Game Boy game was developed and published by Angel, and it's basically the best way I can explain it is a video game where you just have Pokemon battles and none of the stuff in between. And you are Gamera, and you basically fight through Gyaos, Giron virus, and then Super Gyaos. And interestingly enough, it's compatible with the Super Game Boy, which is a popular thing in 1995. So if you don't want to play it in black and white and you want nice fancy backgrounds, you can do that. And then, sorry.
This kind of looks like a Super Godzilla to me. Is it a similar like engine?
Not really. The Game Boy one it's kind of like the Super Godzilla battles where it kind of cuts away to a little cutscene.
Mm-hmm.
But when it's not like that, it is kind of more like Pokemon, where you're just kind of selecting through menus, picking attacks, and defending. And then the second game, or I mean, they both released around the same time. Gyaos Destruction Strategy was developed and published by Sammy, and it's essentially a RTS on the Super Famicom. And it starts off as well, like going through the events of the film, and then it eventually does veer off into other Gamera monsters and stuff, if I remember correctly. But I mean, neither of these games are available in English, though the Gamera Game Boy game does have a partial English patch. The Super Famicom game, I don't believe it does. But the things get a little more interesting with the next game, which also released around the same time, and that is Gamera the Time Adventure. And so Gamera the Time Adventure was a full motion video game released for Bandai's own video game console, the Playdia. So essentially, in the mid 90s, Bandai decided to create their own console that would run on discs, and they're mostly aiming it at children as an educational device. But because Bandai made it, they could, they have the rights to almost any major popular franchise. So they made a game called Gamera the Time Adventure, but they couldn't just it came out in 95, so they couldn't just wholesale use footage from Gamera Guardian of the Universe. So what they did is they essentially remade or kind of created a video game version of Gamera Super Monster. It's a very bizarre game where you actually get to, you're introduced to Zenon, which are the villains from Gamera Super Monster that are in the Star Destroyer ship. That you actually get to see the aliens rendered in beautiful mid 90s video game CG.
Excellent.
And you have to pilot a special ship that can go through time and travel back in time to go through the history of Gamera to capture memories that showcase the world, how good Gamera is. Because I believe the plot is that Zenon is kind of like erased people's memory of Gamera, and so they think he's a bad guy, so you have to go back in time and remind them he's not. It's pretty weird. But what's most important is that they actually got Ayako Fujitani to play your, I guess, kind of like a assistant who guides you through the game. The game itself is basically trivia and little timing mini games where you have to, pretend to shoot missiles at Gamera, but it's just overplayed on top of footage from the original films. And then a big feature for it was that it had a trailer for Gamera Guardian of the Universe on the disc, as well as a message from Miss Fujitani. So it's an interesting film. It's pretty obscure because not many people own a Bandai Playdia, and even fewer own Gamera the Time Adventure. But it exists. The next game, however, is probably the most interesting to people. in that it does purportedly take place in the continuity of the Gamera trilogy, and it was developed by Surveyor Corp and published by Daiei themselves. Daiei had a video game label for a while. Essentially, in 1995, when the Sega Saturn came out, Sega created a game called Panzer Dragoon. It was pretty huge in the way it was rendering 3D graphics, and you rode on a dragon and you shot other monsters. So the people at Surveyor Corps were like, well, we could just do that, but with Gamera. So you control a ship that's fighting all sorts of Gauss mutations and other types of monsters, and then you can summon Gamera to follow your ship and do attacks. It has full motion video cutscenes with incredible acting, in my opinion. And
in English, right?
Everything in this game is fully in English. So even though all Gamera games have only been released in Japan, this game is completely English friendly. It makes me wonder if there was a plan to release it in North America that just fell through. But this game is notable because not only is it a really fun Gamera game, it's also just like recognized as a really good game. Like it was on a lot of people's who didn't even know Gamera. A lot of people would just import this game because it was known as a great PlayStation 1 game. So definitely worth checking out. And it claims to be related in the continuity with the other films, but it's pretty loose. And it's got like multi-headed Gauss and all sorts of crazy stuff. So it's pretty fun. Now, of course,
it reminds me a bit of the Alien franchise, like the Kenner toys, where you had like the snake alien and the dog alien and stuff like that, because you have like Gauss Man and Snake Gauss and Dog Gauss and things like that.
Yeah, they go wild. I feel like for some reason they only had the rights to use Gauss, and they're like, well, we're going to use this as much as we can. And you can actually watch all the cutscenes on YouTube, so if you just want to check those out for a laugh. There have been other Gamera games since, but nothing on the scale of any of these previous ones. There was a 2012 mobile game called Gamera Battle, which is cool in that it utilized the full Rogues Gallery of Gamera minus Zetus. A running theme is that Zetus is not it usually isn't included in anything Gamera. So yeah, you actually get to see all the Heisei Gamera monsters there, and even some like mecha versions of Gamera monsters. There's been plenty of pachinko games, including 2009 CR Gamera, which is quite impressive as it has some really pretty well done CG animations and battles between Gamera and his entire Rogues Gallery, including all the Heisei monsters. And even you can see in the bottom corner there's like a recreation, like a modernized Giron. Some other monsters get modernized as well. And there was also a partnership with Monster Gear, which was a mobile Monster Hunter ripoff from Sega. And there was a Gamera event where you could get armor and weapons styled out of Gamera and Gauss. You can see those in the bottom right. There hasn't been much Gamera since. There was another mobile collaboration from Daiei that had some pretty cool visuals, but there hasn't been a full-fledged Gamera video game in a long time.
I guess we should probably mention City Shrouded in Shadows also, right?
Yes, City Shrouded in Shadow. Actually, I'm surprised that was not here. It's developed by Granzella, who created the Disaster Report series, and it's about you as a little human surviving kaiju attacks. And so it is technically a crossover in that you survive monster attacks from you see Ultraman fighting Ultraman monsters, Godzilla and I think Mothra and King Ghidorah show up, and Gamera and I believe Legion show up, the Ava units, Pat Labors. Though while these are all in the same game, the game goes to lengths to make sure that you never see any of them in the same shot. You never see any of them in the same area even. So it's there's basically a Gamera chapter to this game, and that came out on PS4 not too long ago. So that's the most recent. Is there is that chapter of that game?
Yeah, I wonder if they did that to be modular for if they were to adapt it or re-release it or something like that and couldn't get all the licenses together.
Oh, I think it was just because like Toho, and I think it's mostly on the Toho side, but like Toho and Kadokawa and Tsuburaya, they don't necessarily see eye to eye with how they want their characters to mix.
Mm.
So it was to appease the even though Bandai holds the merchandising rights to all of them, they can't just mix them together. There's some rules they got to follow.
Moving right along, as we mentioned before, Hideaki Anno did a behind-the-scenes documentary for Gamera 3, which, as we were speculating, might have had some influence on the Evangelion rebuilds. But this is sort of a notorious documentary because he was trying to play up the drama of disagreements between really the dramatic staff with Kaneko and the effects staff with Higuchi. And as a result, it really hasn't been reissued since it was originally put out on VHS and has become quite a bit of a hot collector's item. So, if you see it in a store, it'll probably run you north of $60 or something to pick it up. Again, only released in raw Japanese. I was hoping that it would be one of the things that we could maybe get included on the Arrow set, but they are not too happy about it. So because of that, it's one of those sort of buried items.
Yeah, I think this will only ever get translated by fans, if at all.
Which at least Anno has some very dedicated fans, so it's a possibility.
Yeah, it's true. Get those Eva fans riled up.
Indeed. So as we mentioned before, while the trilogy came to a close in 1999, it was an open ending, and not everybody was super wild about that, including a certain Rakugo performer called Shinpei Hayashiya, and he basically took it upon himself to put together a fan film and got together some fan film talent, including like Yutaka Arai, and basically just did his own Gamera 4. It was very low budget. This is a movie made for what you could get a used car for, basically. But he was able to get Yukijiro Hotaru to come back and reprise the role of Inspector Osako. And because it's Hayashiya and he's sort of a known performer, I think it got a little bit more publicity than it was just some random guy doing a fan film. And it has screened around in a few places, including at official Kadokawa events. Kaneko has seen the movie. Hayashiya says that Kaneko gave it his blessing and said that that's how he would wanted the story to go. So good on him. And it's in one of those sort of awkward places where it's not been officially distributed because Hayashiya is now a professional movie maker, and it's a fan film that has Kadokawa's IP, but Kadokawa is also willing to exploit it and show it for special limited engagement events. So where it falls on the lines of how official is this now, it gets into a very murky area when it wasn't necessarily made to be something official, but the people who would be in charge of what is official or not appear to be making money off of it. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's a shame. I think SRS Cinema if I remember correctly, like they inquired about it, see if they could get the rights to release it, and it was an absolute pretty hard no.
They were shut down. Yeah, I would love to see it. I'd love to get to see, just this is a legendary type of thing, and that we've been hearing about this fan films for 17 years now. I'm sure that effects are not, top notch necessarily. If you've sort of seen what Hayashiya did with Deep Sea Monster Raiga or whatnot, or the handful of clips of Gamera 4 that are floating around online, you can kind of maybe get a sense for what it's like. But he said that it's not as comedic as his other films have been. The Gamera 4 suit was actually then recycled for an episode of Yutaka Arai's series Assault Man. It was made into another monster that their sort of Ultramanish character fights. That episode is particularly interesting because Hotaru again cameos in that as a guy that's drunk and complaining about seeing giant birds. So he just he keeps popping up in things. The official Dai suit, while we talked before about how it had been used in Cutie Night, it also showed up in this serious sailor fight that was sort of a very low budget direct to video thing that I guess that because several effects folks kind of were friends with each other, they were just sort of willing to lend this thing around. We talked before about the influence of the Gamera trilogy the on the Godzilla series, but it's something that has kind of continually resonated throughout popular culture and Japanese entertainment specifically. There's several examples out there. I think the particularly noteworthy ones, as we were just talking about Hayashiya's movies. Deep Sea Monster Rego has a character who's named Osako, who is fighting in World War II. Talks about how his son, when he's born, will be named Tsutomu. This guy is played by Yukijiro Hotaru, so it's pretty clear that like he's supposed to be the father of the inspector from the Gamera series. The way that the Gauss eat people was a direct influence on Hajime Isayama when he was coming up with the ideas for the giant man-eating creatures in Attack on Titan. And sort of the full circle there is that Shinji Higuchi wound up directing the live-action Attack on Titan movies down the road, which I am perhaps a little bit more a fan of than some other people are. But the anime, if nothing else, is one of the biggest hits of the decade. And I don't think anybody is going to challenge me on that front. The plot of Gamera was in fact called out specifically in Nobunaga when they're explaining how the space creatures are coming down and evolving from their pods that are crashing and slowing down on arrival. And somebody says, "Oh, this is like a sci-fi movie," and the character's like, "Oh, human Gamera too." I think the motif that you see the most often is actually the Iris arc with Ayana. You see, we talked about how anime that is. Well, a lot of anime have kind of really rolled with that, and you see things like Digimon or Gridman focus on these creatures that take specifically a young girl with severe depression and incorporate them into themselves to gain some power, and then the hero basically works their way to rescue this girl, and that's a motif that you see come up in a few things.
Yeah, and in SSSS Gridman, the monster that does that was actually designed by Mahou Maeda.
That's a good point. Yeah, and then less significantly than that, you'll see little nods popping up to the trilogy and other things that you watch here and there. I was just watching The Idol because that just got a release, and that's a movie that wouldn't have existed if it weren't for the Gamera trilogy. So it's a fun thing that has had rippling effects throughout, even if you don't necessarily think of the Gamera series as being the big staple that the Godzilla series is.
So that image though in the top right, that's banned.
Yes, that's from an episode of Ultraman. Material. Ultraman Max in his TV broadcast, they had this scene because Shusuke Kaniko directed the episode. Gamera was fighting Godzilla in the form of these toys, and they have since stricken that scene from the Ultraman episode. Sadly, it's you got to get your Ultraman Max despecialized editions to see it now.
Restore the Kaneko cut. Release the Kaneko cut. That's what it is.
Incidentally, when I was in Kyoto Station, I did the exact same thing as this character from Lucky Star, where I just looked up and thought about Gamera 3.
Yep, me too.
So we've done some comparison of the Gamera franchise to the Godzilla franchise, but we want to make it clear that while there is a pop cultural influence, these movies were not the major successes, even though creatively and artistically and awards-wise, they did fantastically. They were winning things like the Japanese Nebula Awards and things like that. They weren't raking in the money. So this is a comparison of box office figures, and this is something that we've kind of wondered a little bit about because the official box office figures that we find are actually lower than the production budgets, and we don't fully know how that works out.
Yeah, something is being lost in translation. Because from what we understand, these movies well, maybe not Godzilla's successes, made enough to not only keep the series, going into a trilogy, but it made enough to also, I guess, catch the envy of Toho, who ended up hiring everyone at some point to work on their movies.
Yeah, and it's like we know from the looking at official materials that the budgets are considerably smaller, so that accounts for some of it. If you spend half as much on the movie, you can make half as much money. But just kind of looking at what we're seeing quoted in comparable materials. So you look at the Heisei Gamera perfection and the Heisei Godzilla perfection, and look at what they say the box office is for each one of them, to kind of go make sure you're looking apples to apples necessarily. But what the differences are in terms of exactly how these numbers stack up to reality, whether these are based on certain theatrical releases or not taking into account video and merchandise sales or something. Somehow these movies were profitable enough that they didn't immediately cancel them after the first one. But the bottom line is they were not making the type of money that Godzilla was, or even the Mothra movies were making. And that's why when people are like, oh, why didn't they just continue down this road that they were doing with the Heisei movies? Why did they shake things up with Gamera the Brave? Well, that's a big part of it. That you gotta appeal to the kids, and as adults, as weird nerds, these movies are very satisfying. But for the broader audiences, they're not going to be doing as hot, especially when you're ultimately considering that the giant monster genre is kids movies.
Yeah, it's already a bit of a niche, anyways. But just because I remembered I have this in my notes. Gamera Guardian of the Universe alone took home 6 awards, which is including Best Director and Best Special Effects at the Yokohama Film Festival. And like I mentioned before, Shinobu Nakayama, she actually received a nomination at the Japanese Academy Prize for her performance.
Mm-hmm.
So on the critical level, it was a totally different story.
Yeah, and I think both Gamera and Gamera 2 got Saiyan awards, and I don't think Godzilla did until Shin Godzilla, right?
Yep.
So good on Higuchi for racking those up.
Yeah, because then Tiga got a Saiyan as well. So
yes,
Godzilla was a little late to the party on that one, I guess.
So that kind of is a quick wrap up. So if you were not able to make it to our G-Fest panel, which I know a lot of people weren't able to, hopefully this will be a bit of a consolation prize in the same way that you would feel if you were not allowed to make a Gamera movie but were maybe allowed to write a novel.
Or if you weren't allowed to make a Godzilla movie but were allowed to make a Gamera movie.
Yes, exactly. Nobody was happy.
Nobody got what they wanted, but in the end everything turned out fine.
Yeah. I think we as fans got what we wanted, even though we didn't know we wanted it until we saw those movies.
Yeah.
So with that, we've gone way over the amount of time that we initially would have had, but I think that's the glory of YouTube. So thanks for watching if you watched this far, and see you maybe at the next G-Fest if we have one.
Probably the next virtual convention. Something.
Yeah.